And hello, everybody. I'm Vinny Murphy.
I'm Christian Kutlick.
And this is a concept we wanted to go back to. The Dissecting Fiction bold prediction.
We gotta get a little jingle for that.
Yeah, occasionally. I think we changed it too much. Originally, it was like bold prediction from Dissecting Fiction. Let's go with that. Bold prediction from Dissecting Fiction.
It rolls off the tongue better.
Yeah. So this is a bold prediction from Dissecting Fiction. And on these little mini-sodes, we make a prediction and then we talk about it a little bit. So I'm going to go on this one. There's been a lot of rumors recently about where DC Comics are going. One of the things that pops up is this idea of 5G, the fifth generation. Back at New York Comic Con, they showed part of an incomplete DC Universe timeline. And the rumor, that's a fairly consistent rumor, is where this is going is that characters are going to age and we're going to get a new generation of heroes. But I have sort of a weird prediction based on kind of what I've seen being promoted and what would make the most sense. If we're going with this solid timeline, there's really only been one time where that happened, and that was 1994's Zero Hour Crisis in Time, which is probably the least referenced of the crises, but established a timeline wherein the Justice Society preceded the Justice League. You had really set out years when that timeline first came out. My theory is that the only consistent continuity that people seem to really like was the one that came out of Zero Hour. And being that it seems like they're moving towards resetting the timeline, I think it's going to be really important going forward. They also just put out the entire thing in $150 omnibus, which I might have bought. But I think that title is going to become a very big deal going forward. Even Jeff Johns in the past has referred to it. And with him writing Doomsday Clock, which also seems like it's going to do something with that, I can't imagine Zero Hour isn't about to become very important.
Doomsday's Clock has to end eventually, right? It can't just keep going on.
No, it's only 12 issues. It just take a while to come out.
So you think they're going to reset the whole timeline again? I have to say it's really frustrating to hear DC always doing these resets.
Well, the argument would be, Rebirth kind of already did it, because Rebirth established that, Flashpoint was the anomaly and was the thing that changed everything. And you have Wally now kind of running through hyper time. I think they are going to go back to something to that effect. Even if it's modified, I can't imagine that it wouldn't be the biggest point of reference, because it is where that sort of little mini DC Renaissance in the early 2000s came out of, was really that version of the timeline. It also was cool because, you have Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is really the first time anything like that is done. And then a little less than a decade later, they kind of realize okay, what did we do? Some of this doesn't make any sense anymore. Yeah. So, Zero Hour was one of the more effective corrections to everything. So I think if you were to try to correct the timeline and make it truly progressive, truly have your characters age and have to usher in a new era, I think it's the point to go back to.
Do you think this is something that's necessary?
Necessary is always
I know that's kind of a loaded term.
Yeah, I think, as much as it can be at this point, right? Because they made the focus of the story that the New 52 was an aberration. Yeah. And you need it to be, if it's an aberration, then it has to be going off of the path of something. And I think the last time DC had a timeline that made sense was coming out of Zero Hour.
I don't think my predictions are anything as groundbreaking as that. For me, I think next year they will announce a Final Fantasy XVI. Not necessarily a release date, but they will say Final Fantasy XVI is in production for the PS5. Because we are at the end of our console generation. And
what a great generation it was.
I quite enjoyed it. It was there's some flops. It was a real weird computer focused generation. But Final Fantasy 15 is done and dusted. It's had its 15 million DLCs to actually complete the game. Because Final Fantasy 15 was infamously unfinished on release, and they just patched it all in afterwards. And Kingdom Hearts 3 is done with, so that was the other big Square Enix title. So they don't really have anything to work on besides Final Fantasy 14, which just released Shadowbringers this year. So the MMO team is working on another DLC, but what's the rest of the team doing?
So this is where I get confused with Final Fantasy now, because they're done with 15, but they're going back to work on 14?
No, 14's the MMO.
Okay.
But
it's not the first MMO.
No,
right?
the first MMO is, I believe, 11. 14, they're still expanding on. 15's done. That was the one directed by the guy who did Kingdom Hearts 3. And he's currently doing Final Fantasy 7, which is going to be released in 2 parts. Both of them 4-disc, which I don't know how the fuck that happened.
Yeah, are we over that now?
Not Square Enix. So that's my prediction. I think they will announce a Final Fantasy 16, not a release date, but they are announcing a PS5. You need a big marquee title, and Final Fantasy 16 would be that title. The other prediction I have is that I think we will get a release date for Breath of the Wild 2.
Or whatever it's going to be called.
Yeah, they haven't given us an official title. They announced it this year at E3, saying it's being developed. When that was first announced, it was said that it was supposed to be DLC for Breath of the Wild. So I can imagine they're pretty far along in it, that they just had to put on a few clean touches, so it would be released like early 2021 or something.
I think that's interesting too, especially, we were just talking about how the generation is ending. The Switch is kind of immune to that for the moment.
Yeah, because it came out, 2 years ago? Not even?
Yeah, and it's also just the platform is sort of presented differently where they can get a few more years out of this. I think it's never been about graphical power for Nintendo, and the Switch is a bona fide hit. It's an interesting system. I'm really excited to see what they do with it as going forward.
Yeah, I mean, they've been hitting it out of the park recently with Three Houses, Odyssey, Breath of the Wild. Pokemon's a bit controversial right now. I don't think they'll announce anything for Pokemon. A lot of that stuff is tied up in merchandising sales. The only other prediction I could have is that I think we will get a release date for Metroid Prime 4.
Really, I was under the impression that they're not too far along with that last I saw, but I'm always, you get those Nintendo Directs and you feel like you're completely thrown off guard.
Yeah, I love the Nintendo Directs because they always have something weird to throw you.
Yeah.
Even if it is they're going to announce a new Smash character. Here's Terry Bogard from King of Fighters. Who saw that coming?
I'm unreasonably excited for Doom 64, by the way.
Yeah, that's going to be a cool game.
But, so those were some bold predictions that we just made. Let us know what you guys think. Check us out on most major social media, on most major podcast platforms. Once again, I am Vinny Murphy.
I'm Christian Kutlick.
And thanks for listening.